Okay, this is, what is today? Friday, November 12th. And I am now finally ready to finish. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. I am now finally. No. Stop that. They just have to get into things. She never does this when I'm not sitting here. Only when I'm trying to actually use this stuff does she want to have anything to do with it. That's just part of the frustration of having cats. I'm not going to finally finish the book of Judges today. I still have one story left, 3 chapters, Judges 19 through 21. I also intend to get to the book of Ruth today, if we can. That's a short book, only 4 chapters. We'll see if we can make it all the way through that. This story I'm about to read is one of the stories at the end of the book of Judges that is set in the time of the Judges. There's a cat like right behind this camera. There she goes again. Okay, there she goes. We read about the first. There's really 3. I mean, Judges itself has the story of the Judges. Then it ends with these 2 separate stories of different things that take place during the time of the Judges. Both of them probably pretty early in the time of the Judges. And Ruth itself is a story that is set in the time of the Judges. So we have kind of like these 3. Now, it's not part of the book of Judges, but we have like these 3 separate stories. 2 at the end of Judges, and then the book of Ruth, which take place in the time of the Judges. These 2 stories at the end of the book of Judges are very dark, negative, brutal, violent, ugly stories, showing just how deep into depravity the Israelites had sunk. Ruth, of course, is a very different focus. So we read about the story of Micah and the Danites and the Levite that Micah had hired to be his family priest, who eventually sold himself out to the Danites and went with them up to their new home, which was not the part of the land they had been allotted as far as their tribal inheritance. They did not take that land, so they ended up going somewhere else in the very northern tip of Israel. And they hired this Levite, who had already been hired by Micah, to be their tribal priest as he had been Micah's family priest. And all of this is against what God had told them to do in the law. And this priest this Levite, he actually wasn't a priest. He made himself into a priest. They made him a priest, but he was actually not legitimately an Aaronic priest. But he did have a noble genealogy. He was the grandson of Moses. And so it was an example of just how, and this is the second generation after they came into the land. This is Moses' grandson. And this is early in the days after they came into the land, and early in the period of the Judges. So not long after Joshua and the other leaders of the land had died out, and they were already turning away from the actual instructions they were given and doing their own thing. Now we're going to read an even darker story that takes place here in chapters 19, 20, and 21. This is a very dark, brutal, unpleasant story. This is about as dark as it gets in the scriptures. There are other nasty things that happen and that are recorded in other history books in the scriptures, but this is Israelites doing violence to Israelites. This is about as awful as it gets. In those days, Israel had no king. There is a sort of lament here in referring to needing a human king to keep order and authority. And that, there is a sense of that in that statement, but really it's talking about how God was not their king. They were not making God be there. The whole covenant, the whole pact, the agreement they had with God, covenant relationship they had with God, is that He would be their God, and they would be His people. He would be their king, their ruler, their suzerain, their Lord, and He would take care of them and provide for them if they followed His commands. So yes, there is a sense of them needing a human king here to help keep order and authority. But it's really deeper than that. It's going on, looking beyond the human king and saying that they were not accepting God as king. Now, a Levite, so another corrupt Levite, this one does not get a name. The Levite in the previous story did eventually get a name. This one does not get a name. He's just a Levite, who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim, took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And yes, this is that Bethlehem. The Bethlehem that we're familiar with. A concubine is basically a lower class wife. She is a wife. She's not just a mistress or a slave, but she's basically a lower class wife. But she was unfaithful to him, or she was angry with him somehow. She left him and went back to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah. So he had done something to upset her, or else she wasn't faithful to him, although I think it's more likely. This translation says she wasn't faithful to him. It's a little bit more ambiguous than that. She could have just been upset with him. Given what happens in this guy's overall attitude, as exemplified by his actions in this story, I think it's more likely that she was just upset with him. So she left him because she was with him for some reason. I don't think she was actually unfaithful to him. But who knows? I mean, we really don't. After she had been there 4 months, if she had been unfaithful to him, I don't think he would have gone back for her. I think more likely she was upset with him for doing something and she left. Which, as we'll see from this guy's character later on, she was wise to do. She was smart to do. She should have stayed away from him. After she had been there 4 months, her husband went to her to persuade her to return. So he decided that he didn't want to be without her. He wanted her to come back. He had with him his servant and 2 donkeys. She took him into her father's house, and when her father saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father would be glad for his daughter to go back with this guy. His daughter needs a husband, and she has one, and so the father would be glad for her to go back with her husband. His father-in-law, the girl's father, prevailed upon him to stay. So he remained with him 3 days, eating and drinking and sleeping there. This is typical hospitality. This is hospitality culture of this day and time in this area of the world. On the 4th day, they got up early, and he prepared to leave. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Refresh yourself with something to eat, and then you can go." So the 2 of them sat down to eat and drink together. Afterward, the girl's father said, "Please stay tonight and enjoy yourself." And when the man got up to go, his father-in-law persuaded him, so he stayed there that night. So that's 4 nights now. 4 days he's been there now. On the morning of the 5th day, when he rose to go, the girl's father said, "Refresh yourself. Wait until afternoon." So the 2 of them ate together. Then, when the man, with his concubine and his servant, got up to leave, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said, "Now look, it's almost evening. Spend the night here. The day is nearly over. Stay and enjoy yourself. Early tomorrow morning, you can get up and be on your way home." But, unwilling to stay another night, the man left and went toward Jebus, that is, Jerusalem, with his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine. I bet this father of this bride is going to regret later that he detained these people for so long, considering what's going to happen now. So they're not leaving early in the day. They're not having a full day's worth of travel here as they go. They left late in the afternoon. When they were near Jebus, and the day was almost gone, the servant said to his master, "Come, let us stop at this city of the Jebusites and spend the night." This was during the time when Jerusalem was still under control of the Jebusites. Way back at the beginning of Judges, we read about the Benjamites, I think it was the Benjamites, taking over this city, but apparently not keeping it, because the Israelites will not get Jerusalem for good until the days of David. Well, it says here in verse 21 of chapter 1, the Benjamites failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. Obviously not in the days to come, so that particular line was written at some point before David comes along and finally takes the city for good. But right now, the Israelites are not in control of Jerusalem. So the Jebusites are there. In fact, the city itself is called Jebus, or Jebus, I don't know how you pronounce that. His master replied, "No, we won't go into an alien city. whose people are not Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah. He added, come, let's try to reach Gibeah or Ramah and spend the night in one of those places. He should have gone to Jerusalem. If they had gone to Jerusalem, they would have been in better shape than what was going to end up happening to them. So they went on, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah in Benjamin. There they stopped to spend the night. They went and sat in the city square, but no one took them into his home for the night. Now this is a sign that the people of the city are of poor character. If a traveler arrives at a town and sits in the city square, someone is supposed to offer him lodging for the night. That's the way their culture worked, and no one is doing that, which alone, that by itself raises some red flags here about what the men of the city are like. That evening, an old man from the hill country of Ephraim, who was living in Gibeah, the men of the place were Benjamites, so he is not a native of the city, he's from Ephraim, came in from his work in the fields. When he looked and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, where are you going? Where do you come from? He answered, we are on our way from Bethlehem in Judah to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim where I live. I had been to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I am going to the house of the Lord. I don't know exactly what that means, if he's referring to the tabernacle in Shiloh or whatever, or if it's a copyist error and they actually meant to say my house instead of the house of the Lord. I'm not sure. But he's on his way somewhere else. He's just here to stop for the night. So far in the story, his goal has been to get back home with his concubine. So I tend to think that he probably should be saying my house instead of house of the Lord here. No one has taken me into his house. We have both straw and fodder for our donkeys and bread. We have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for ourselves, your servants, me, your maidservant, that be his concubine, and the young man with us, that's his servant. We don't need anything, so they would have been ideal guests, because they can take care of their own needs. They have enough stuff for themselves and their animals, they just need a place to stay. You are welcome in my house, the old man said. Let me supply whatever you need, only don't spend the night in the square. Bad things happen in the square at night. So he took him into his house and fed his donkeys. After they had washed their feet, they had something to eat and drink. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. So you knew something bad was going to happen. This has all the hallmarks of a horror story right here. You know, being delayed in your travel, you know, an incident or a coincidence that happens to delay you when you're traveling, not getting to your destination in time, having to settle to go to someplace else right as the sun is setting, not knowing where you are, not knowing about the people who live there, getting bad treatment from the people as soon as you arrive because they're not inviting you into your house, the old man showing up late and then warning you not to spend the night in the square. You know, some bad stuff. This, of course, also calls back to the incident with Lot in Sodom, where Lot in this case was the host. He was sitting outside the city gates. He saw the two angels coming. He invited them into his house, and then while they were there, a mob came to the door and wanted to attack them. This is a direct callback to that incident. There are differences. Okay, in this case, the traveler, the person who is traveling around, is our character. Lot was the host in the previous case, and the travelers were angels. In this case, the traveler is not an angel, just a regular guy. And the old man is in the role of Lot, inviting him into his house. But it's very similar setup. We're directly calling back to the imagery of Lot in Sodom, and then in the night that Sodom fell. So some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house, pounding on the door. They shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house, so that we can have sex with him." The owner of the house went outside. So he actually, I guess, physically left the building and went out to go see them face to face, and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this disgraceful thing. In both this case and in the story of Lot, the host, Lot in the previous story, the old man, the unnamed old man in this story, in both cases, these hosts try to intervene on behalf of their guests. In both cases, they offer their daughters instead to the mob. And this obviously puts us at odds with these people, because this just seems like such a vile thing to do. And it is, I mean, really, honestly. But you do have to understand that in their culture, the host was responsible for his guests' well-being. And so putting the needs of your guest ahead of the needs of yourself or your family members isn't really that much of a stretch in their minds. Now, this old man will eventually actually throw these, we'll see. Let's go on and read. This old man is not as righteous as Lot. Now, Lot had his own problems, although he is ultimately declared to have been a righteous man. This old man is probably better than the man of the city that he's living in. He's not a native there. He was from Ephraim. But he has his own problems, and he is not going to be as... we'll see. We'll read. So look, he says, here is my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But to this man, don't do such a disgraceful thing. But the men would not listen to him. So again, he's willing to give his women up for the sake of his male guest. They had a servant with them too. There was not just this one traveler. He actually had himself and his concubine, and they had another servant with him too. But apparently they weren't interested in the servant. I don't know. But the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them. And they raped her and abused her throughout the night. So they ended up being pacified with that. And at dawn, they let her go. So they did. I don't know exactly what message is being sent here about these men. Obviously, they were criminals. They were fiends of some kind. It was not strictly homosexual because they ended up having sex with this woman. So this is not strictly a homosexual issue. I think it's just meant to show us that they were depraved. It's like they were engaging in behavior they ought not to engage in. And they were going to engage in it no matter what, whether it was with the guy or the girl. They ended up settling for the girl after the dude threw her out there to them. I don't know what happened to the old man's daughter. I don't know if she ended up, we don't really ever hear from her, so I guess she ended up avoiding this disaster. I don't know. But the man himself took his concubine and threw her out there to him. So I'm thinking that this girl probably had pretty good reason to run away from him in the first place. But this whole incident started back at the beginning of the chapter when she left him. Again, the translation, the line in this translation is she was unfaithful to him. I'm not really quite so certain that that's what that means. I think she had pretty good reason to want to get away from this guy if this was the sort of attitude he had about things. So they raped her throughout the night. They raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. So they didn't actually kill her, but they raped her so much that she died from it. I'm not sure if there is a term that discusses. I don't think so. I can't think of a word that specifically discusses that kind of death. Death by rape. You've heard of rape and murder cases. They didn't actually murder her, but they raped her so much that she died from it. Again, I'm not sure if there's a word to describe that or not. If there is, I don't think I've heard of it, or I can't think of it. It's not in my vocabulary. But that's essentially what happened. They did not actually murder her, but they raped her so much that she died from it. So she made her way back to her house where her master was staying and fell down at the door and lay there until daylight. It doesn't actually say that she had died there, but it certainly gives you that impression. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house, and stepped out to continue on his way like nothing had happened. This is a great guy, isn't he? This is sure a great guy here. There lay his concubine, following the doorway of the house, with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. Then the man, so she's dead. Then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. This is one wonderful husband, isn't he? I can see why this lady left him. It's not too hard to imagine what this girl may have been thinking when she was trying to get away from this guy before. He doesn't seem like the ideal husband. When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine, limb by limb, into 12 parts, and sent them into all the areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it said, now he was a Levite, by the way. He was not a priest, apparently. He was of the class of Levites that were Levites but not priests. But they would have been familiar with how to carve up a body. The priests, of course, carved up the animal sacrifices. So this guy, whether or not he ever had official priest training, was close enough to the heart of the sacrificial system that he would have known how to use a knife to cut up a body. So he cut her up limb by limb into 12 parts and sent them into all the areas of Israel. Everyone who's, all the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, everyone who saw it said, "Such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came up out of Egypt. Think about it. Consider it. Tell us what to do." So they're stirred to action. They're stirred to action, and they are going to take action. Let me go ahead and read a couple verses, and I'll start a new video. Then all the Israelites, from Dan to Beersheba, and from the land of Gilead, that's the tribes to the east of the Jordan River, so from north to south and to the east, all the Israelites, all around the country, came out as one man and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. Now they will not assemble like this again for who knows how long. This is happening pretty early in the time of the Judges. We're going to get the name of the high priest at the time coming up here in a bit, and it's Phinehas. And Phinehas was the high priest still in the days of Joshua. He was Aaron's grandson. So he's still alive and is still ministering as a high priest at this time. So this is pretty early in the time of the Judges, not that long after Joshua died. And so let's say around 1350 or so BC. Maybe a little after that, but not too much farther after that. So not too long after the original campaign, not too long after the original conquest, and they still had most of their army available and accessible. They will not be disunited again. We read all throughout. So this is happening before the stories of the Judges themselves that occupy this book from Judges 3 onward. Okay, this is happening before all that. And in those stories of those judges, those were all regional, local conflicts happening here and there. You had some that were happening here, some that were happening there, north, south, east, wherever. This is more national. This one gets all of them. Okay, and throughout the rest of the time of the Judges, they don't muster a national response like this. When the Philistines are oppressing them, they don't muster a national response, or the Moabites, or the Ammonites, or whoever. But this gets a full-blown, all-national response. So they assembled as one man before the Lord in Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 soldiers armed with swords. So they still, remember, when they came into the land, remember those books of numbers and those lists of numbers of tribes, 600,000. Now, whether that's really 600,000 or it's an exaggeration or hyperbole or whatever, this is not that much less than that. So they went from 600,000 to 400,000. So most of their army is still intact from where it was when they went into the land to begin with. Then they will not muster a fighting force like this again for quite some time. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah, so they know what's happening. Now, Gibeah is a city where this happened, and it was in Benjamin, and the people there were Benjamites. So the tribe of Benjamin is aware the rest of the other tribes are marshaling their forces against Gibeah. Then the Israelites said, "Tell us how this awful thing happened." I'm going to go ahead and stop there.